"Hello, and welcome to Real Cheating Story. Can I ask you what you are doing, sir?" said the man to my left, just outside of my car window. "Yes, you can," I answered. "Ask away." "That's not quite what I meant," the voice said. "I want to know what you were doing." Of course, I noticed and was fully aware that the man asking was wearing a city police officer's uniform. I wasn't so intoxicated that I couldn't recognize that fact. I was feeling a decent buzz by this point. The reason for my casual response was that, right now, I simply didn't care about much of anything, especially dumb questions, no matter who asked them. I'm sitting here enjoying watching the moonlight reflect off the lake while sipping on my whiskey, I answered. It's a calming sight. Now, I don't like to sound pretentious, but I happen to enjoy the flavor of this particular whiskey. I spent the extra money to buy it, and I intend to enjoy it. If I may add, it's a little better than the blended variety that's usually offered, at least this time. Something about the moonlight is kind of calming, too. "Sir, are you drunk?" the voice asked. "Almost," I answered. "I hope to be there before long. In fact, I'd like to forget a few things tonight. I'd at least like to reach the point where I can get rid of some of the weight in my life without too much regret." "Okay, we can get to that in a minute," the voice said. "Do you realize that operating a motor vehicle while intoxicated is a crime?" "Yes, sir, I do," I answered. "But I'd like to point out I am not operating a motor vehicle. I am merely sitting in one, drinking and getting intoxicated. This vehicle has been rigged to not operate, or at least not move, if the driver is inebriated. The driver has to enter a 4-digit PIN number and blow into this device." I pointed to the straw above the ignition switch. "Any alcohol content above 3/4 of the legal limit renders the vehicle inoperable. I am certainly incapable of operating this vehicle." The voice pointed out that the interior light was on, as was the radio, or at least the sound system. "Yep, that all works," I said. "I want to see well enough to not spill when I pour my whiskey. I could listen to music if I wanted. Right now, I just want a little background noise. It's cool enough to not need the AC. I'd also like to point out that while the engine may turn on automatically occasionally to recharge the battery, the car cannot be put into gear and driven," I added. "So, would you care to explain why you are sitting out here in a city park drinking?" the voice asked. I looked at him closely. "Well, sir," I offered, "I needed a place to sit and collect my thoughts. Home is just not conducive to that endeavor at the present time." I wondered how he'd react to my change in tone. "You don't need to call me sir. Officer will suffice, or you can call me by my name, Gary," he said. "May I see your driver's license?" I handed it to him, and he passed it to his partner. I was sure he had already run the license plate number, so he knew I owned the car. Maybe he was just checking who was using it. I almost laughed. I could understand some of the politically correct demands of society, but cops offering their first names in a nonviolent encounter? This guy seemed unflappable. "Well, instead of calling you officer, 3 syllables, I figured I'd cut that short and call you sir," I said. He looked at me closely and then grinned. "You aren't that drunk, are you?" he asked. He could tell I was just being a bit of a smart aleck. "Oh, I'm every bit that drunk," I answered. "I'm just not that foolish and can maintain, at least for now. I really don't care if I get too drunk to cope." I was aware of the cop's partner stepping back up to return my license. They obviously had no intention to leave, but they hadn't ordered me to step out of the car either. I wondered about that. They stood there, hunched over, while they observed me looking uncomfortable. Both refused my offers for a drink or to sit in my car where they could relax. Their sergeant arrived and conferred with them. I guess later on, they quickly established my identity. When the first officer came back, he walked around the car and sat down in the passenger seat. "How about we talk a bit, Mr. Jacobs?" I liked the young man. I told him, the last Mr. Jacobs I knew was my father. "My name is John." He smiled and nodded. Then he asked, "Do you have somebody I need to call?" I shook my head and said, "Not unless it's illegal for me to continue drinking. If it is, you can call my lawyer." "Drinking alcohol is legal in the park until 2 a.m., he said. "Then I'll sit here until then, or until I'm ready to leave. They'll either call an Uber or my daughter to come get me. They'll need to talk to her anyway. By the way, why did you decide to sit with me?" "I got special permission. I'm not sure why my sergeant told me to sit with you and talk," he offered. "Why, What do you know about me? Not much, he said. This started as a simple call about a man drinking in a car in the park. Once we identified you, my directive was to sit and engage. So here I am. I really have no idea what that means. My sergeant said have a single drink if I think the situation warrants it. Hell, sign off on it. That alone gets me thinking there's more to the story, but I'm still not going to have a beer or any of that whiskey. Do you have any soda or water? The young cop said, this is single-barrel whiskey. It's almost sacrilegious to dilute it, I exclaimed with a grin. But there might be a soda you'd like in the cooler behind your seat. I like something caffeinated every now and then, so I keep some stocked. He reached back to open the small refrigerator unit. What kind of car is this? He asked. It looks like a regular little hybrid from the outside, but everything in it is tech. This is no ordinary car. Who are you? He asked. I ignored the young cop's confusion and changed the subject by asking, are you married? He shook his head. Well, I won't be for much longer. Have you ever thought about marriage? Or rather, the sanctity of marriage? Fidelity versus infidelity? Well, yeah, Gary offered hesitantly. I'd expect my wife not to fool around, and I sure as hell wouldn't. I had a girlfriend who thought that since we weren't married, she could still sleep with whoever she wanted. We aren't together anymore. Not after I caught her with another guy in our apartment. I asked him what he did. I almost did enough to get kicked off the force. I shoved my service weapon into his and threatened him. He was with her when I got home. If I'd known they were recording there, I still might have punched him, but I never would have pulled my weapon. I laughed and offered my fist for a bump. He grinned back. Of course, he begged and cried, and then later tried to file a complaint. He was taken aside and told he'd have a hard time if he pursued anything. He might not even be able to walk down the street without having to show ID every block or two. And if he spit on the sidewalk, he'd be arrested. He got the message and left town. I still got a letter of reprimand, though, he continued. That was a total gift, and only because a senior officer had been in a similar situation a few months before and they covered for him. Well, that's a better story than I have, I confessed. I'd have loved to catch the guy while he was with my wife. I might have pulled the trigger, though I'd certainly have nailed him where it hurts, even if he was bigger and younger than me. Gary looked at me, then said, okay, I take it your wife is cheating, and you know who it is? I nodded. The kid was perceptive. You didn't catch them in the act? He asked. I shook my head. My wife Donna gave me the dumb line, we need to talk. She didn't even preface it by saying, honey, I got no more respect than Rodney Dangerfield. I said, I got home from a long day at work, and there was my wife and sister-in-law waiting with a couple small suitcases packed. I walked in the door and got ambushed. Damn, Gary exclaimed. What happened? I get told I'm a worthless scum sucker, I said as I took a sip of my whiskey. Well, not in those exact words. What the wife says is she found somebody more exciting, more in tune with her needs than I have been. Doris, her sister, is sitting there smirking at me, listening. I ask her what she is talking about, and she says she found a real man, one who makes her feel special, who puts her needs above his own. I said, her sister is nodding like one of those little bobblehead dogs you used to see in the back window of a car. Then the sister-in-law, says he has plenty of money to support her in the way she deserves, so no arguing about it, no talk of divorce. You better get on board and let her have her fun without any fuss. She went on to tell me the guy was strong enough to handle both of them and rock their worlds. Apparently, both women are fascinated by this guy now, and that hurt. Not that she was cheating. That part one hadn't even fully processed yet. It was that I did not fill her needs and make her feel valued. Strangely, that was my first thought. Plus, I couldn't or didn't support her lifestyle. I have to admit, too, I was confused by it all. Donna never complained about our relationship before, so I knew I was adequate in that department, and I treated her well. But the part about not supporting her was plainly wrong. You think I altered this car to keep myself from getting a DUI? I built this thing because my brother-in-law was a chronic drinker, and I was trying to protect him, do my part as a member of the extended family. He'd have to enter the pin and blow into the analyzer before he could drive home after drinking. I always suspected the reason he drank so much was probably because of his difficult wife. He was a nice guy and stayed with her because of his kids, even if they were mainly grown. The idiot couldn't get the car to run one night and accepted a ride from one of his drunk friends, and both got killed. I took the car back. "Let's get back to your wife, Mr. Jacobs," the young cop said patiently. I told him to call me John. "Okay, John, so tell me about the rest of your encounter with your wife." I grinned. "You're recording this, aren't you? I still can't figure out why you're sitting here with me. Do you have a degree in psychology or something? Is this one of those new age woke interventions?" I asked as I took a sip. "Not that I care. I'm going to sit here and drink until you arrest me, or I need to pee." "Oh, I get it. You wait until I step out and arrest me for either public intoxication or urinating in public." Gary shook his head. "Nope. Neither of those things are more than a minor ticket. One of my bosses made the decision that I was to sit here with you, and that's what I intend to do. My degree is in engineering. I went to school under an ROTC program and served my 4 in the Army after college. After I was discharged, I needed a job, and the police force was hiring. So, 2 years in, here I am. Engineering." "Huh?" I said. "Well, maybe later I'll show you how this car is set up. You might enjoy the tour. Anyway, back to my story. The wife, Donna, tells me I'm a worthless human waste. Not her exact words, but the same meaning. Her sister agrees, and they pick up their little cases and walk out the door laughing. My wife says she'll be home Sunday afternoon or evening, and we would discuss it. "Fat chance I'll be there for that," I muttered. "I have a daughter who just graduated college, and I need to call. I'm a little afraid to, though. She's at that vulnerable age, trying to start a career and maybe a social life, while living on her own for the first time. How do I tell her that her mother is unfaithful? Worse, what if she knew already and was afraid to tell me? Even worse than that, what if she knew and condoned it? I couldn't take that betrayal. I began to shake, almost losing it. "Hey, guy," Gary said abruptly, trying to break me out of it. John, Mr. Jacobs." He paused, regrouping. "Let's approach this one step at a time. You haven't talked to your daughter, correct?" I nodded, then shook my head, confused about which way to answer. "Tell me about her," Gary said. I relaxed a bit. "I love my daughter. She came along only a year after the wife and I had been married. We got married while both of us were still in college. The wife said no more kids, so that was it. One kid, no matter what I wanted. I know what you were thinking, but yes, my daughter is mine. She even resembles me, or rather other females on my side of the family. She's not as awkward looking as me, thank God." Gary laughed along, which made me feel better. "She's smart as a whip and decided to study computers instead of engineering, even though she has the aptitude. You ought to call her now," Gary suggested. I bowed my head and shook my head again. He shrugged, but I could tell he wasn't going to let that go. "Later, maybe," I conceded, not happy about the idea. "I don't want to leave my car here, and I'll need a ride when I do. I need to figure that out. I'm just not ready to go. That's part of what I've been thinking about. I'm making plans about how I want to move forward. If you keep drinking that whiskey, you're not going to remember any of those plans anyway," Gary offered. "Sure I will," I said. "I have a voice-operated recorder going. I've been making notes." "Sorry, I should have led with that. To tell you, our conversation is recorded automatically. I just assumed your body cam was on. I expect to have anything I say recorded." "So, do you know who your wife is seeing?" Gary asked. I nodded. About that time, he received a call on his radio. He stepped away from my car, and after a few moments, he returned. "Mr. Jacobs, what is your job with eSync Robotics?" he asked. I shrugged and told him I was an engineer. Gary smiled. "More than that, a very senior engineer, right?" I nodded. "This just got more involved than sit and engage," he said. "My captain said you were the man who developed some of their cutting-edge prosthetics. He was just on the line. He said you were responsible for his daughter walking again. You developed a prototype for limb function that helps existing limbs to function normally. That answers the question of why I'm sitting here talking to you. He asked me personally for an update." I shrugged. "He obviously has an interest in you. Please, Mr. Jacobs, don't screw this up for me," Gary added. I could tell he was supposed to keep part of what he'd said to himself. I wondered how he knew I'd been contacted by his officers. I suspected he'd flagged my name, and he'd be notified immediately about anything concerning me. That wasn't exactly legal in my mind, but it was nice he was looking out for me. I'd known Eddie since junior high. His teenage daughter had been injured in a boating accident 2 years before and lost the use of her right leg. He was happy to let me use his daughter as a test subject for one of my prototypes, and now his daughter was on her feet and walking. Eddie and I had stayed close, so I was happy to help. "I'd like to take you home, sir," Gary said. I refused adamantly. "How about I take you to a hotel? You sleep off your drink and approach the day tomorrow with a fresh perspective." "Seriously? You expect me to look at the world tomorrow with anything better than I do today?" I snapped. "No, I said a fresh perspective. That means a clear head," Gary explained. "Make decisions rationally and not clouded by alcohol." I said, "I like the alcohol and am not ready to go anywhere yet." He shrugged. He tried to distract me a bit by asking about the prosthetics I was developing. I told him that was only one of our divisions. We had several projects ongoing. We were also working on features to enable self-driving cars. I could see him visibly interested in some of the technical aspects. He asked about some of the other projects we were developing. We started a line of voice-operated robotics to enhance the lives of paraplegics, giving them a little autonomy in their daily lives. Voice-controlled motorized wheelchairs, for instance. Some of our devices did even more. We were even working on robotic arms that could pick things up and even help users eat. We were working on one that would assist with personal hygiene tasks. We had a little setback when one of our test models got overly enthusiastic and shouted something inappropriate. I paused, gauging Gary's reaction. He stared at me for a second and burst out laughing. I could tell he had a sense of humor like mine. "Tell me why you wanted to be a cop," I asked. "You seem to have the technical aptitude and the right credentials. Why didn't you apply to eSync Robotics?" "I did. They weren't hiring. I got a letter saying they'd keep my resume on file," Gary said. "I knew that was a brush-off, and my resume ended up in the round file. I needed a decent-paying job locally. My mom needed financial help, and my sister is in college. It is what it is." "I wasn't drunk enough to overlook this kid's potential," I said. "Send me your resume directly and come visit me in a few days. I've got some obvious personal issues to work out first, but I'll see what I can do. That is, if you're still interested in that kind of career." He stuttered a thank you, then took a deep breath and got back to the task at hand. He wasn't going to let himself get sidetracked. "How did you find out the name of the guy your wife is seeing?" he asked. "I followed my wife and her sister to the Marriott. Nobody pays attention to a little hybrid sedan like this. I watched them as they met the guy in the lobby. That was all it took. The guy embraced and kissed both my soon-to-be ex-wife and my sister-in-law." Gary looked at me suspiciously, but didn't state the obvious, that I had to know the individual. "Yep, I know the guy. He's definitely not the well-off, successful person my wife thinks he is. I'm guessing he's playing games, but he's certainly not the guy who can provide the life she thinks she wants," I said. "Well, I assume you make a pretty decent living, Mr. Jacobs, John," Gary said. "If you're a senior engineer, after all, why would your wife think she needs more money? Or is that just something she said to bother you?" I laughed bitterly. "Ah, you're curious if Donna's just looking for excitement, or if she's after more material things. Probably a little of both. We had a fairly active relationship, couple times a week, at least. I'm only 45 and still in good shape, at least that's what I think. My wife might argue the point, but she seemed happy with our intimacy. We were compatible." I paused, thinking. I think she's just getting restless. Talking to her sister has probably put ideas in her head. My sister-in-law is one of those compulsive individuals. She'll go gambling and be ahead a few $100, but by the end of the night, she's drunk and broke, heading to the ATM for more money. She says she's bound to hit again, but she never does. She has a decent job, but she's always broke. My wife bails her out constantly, and that's caused some tension between us. Gary listened intently as I continued. "I think money is a bigger part of the issue with Donna. She doesn't think I bring home enough. She works as a school administrator, so we have a double income. We live comfortably in a modest but nice home. I paid for our daughter's college education so she could avoid student loans. We go out to eat at least once a week at a nice restaurant. We travel a couple of times a year, and she gets to buy jewelry when we go on cruises. But she wants more, a fancier car, for example, even though ours are only a couple of years old. She got upset when I bought this car back for my sister-in-law after one of our bailouts. She said a hybrid is beneath our station, even though this car has been adapted to be far from simple. Gary seemed thoughtful as I spoke. She drives a small sporty coupe, but still wants more. She says I should go in and demand a raise. I know I could get one, but she'd just spend the extra money or give it to her sister, and we'd be right back where we started. I didn't add that my brother has a bigger house than mine, but he has more kids. I told Donna years ago that we didn't need a bigger house with more empty bedrooms. She never budged on the no more kids front. Gary paused for a moment. I don't want to be a bad guy, but it seems like your wife might be unhappy you weren't pushing for a raise. She seems to think you should demand it, even if you think your lifestyle is good. She thinks all you have to do is ask, and you refuse, Gary offered. Well, part of that is my brother is my boss, I said. Gary looked at me in confusion. Yeah, Bob is the CEO and general manager. Thing is, we draw the same income, which my wife also knows. She just thinks we are both selling ourselves short. I didn't want to reveal the rest of the story, not then, and not to a man I didn't know well, who had heard more about my private life than he should have. Bob and I not only worked for eSync, we owned it, or rather, our trust owned the controlling interest. We set our income level to be comfortable, but not excessive. My older brother Bob was also trained as an engineer, but he liked the business side and got an MBA, so when he graduated, he started a small firm building computerized control units for various electronics. We'd used money from our inheritance, which was all locked away in a trust. The trust had paid for both our college educations. Of course, Bob hired me even before I graduated. The company had paid me while I went back to school for an advanced degree. I was married at the time with a baby, so my wife welcomed the extra money. We just never bothered to let it be known how the company's infrastructure was formulated. Our families just assumed we held senior positions because we'd been with the company since its inception. We hired special talent to make it run, although for years now, our human resources hired most of the workers. The trust protected the company, but our individual assets were all subject to community property loss. That was part of what I was thinking about when Gary and his partner had tapped on my window earlier. So your wife thinks you are too soft to get with your brother and demand to be paid what you're worth? Gary surmised. I nodded. He didn't come out and say it or ask directly, but I could tell he wondered if I was too passive. Maybe I was in my wife's eyes, but I was happy with my job and my current lifestyle. We could live even better if she didn't squander our money on her sister. So, have you made any decisions so far? He asked. I told him only that I would be getting a divorce. I wasn't about to accept the disrespect anymore. 24 years of marriage be damned. I think you need to have a talk with your daughter, he suggested. You may be afraid of her reaction, but you need to hear it. I nodded reluctantly. Then he suggested he drive me home, but when I cringed, he said, well, your wife won't be there, but I can't see where you might be reluctant. Stay there. You know, be seen as the rejected husband waiting for his wife to come home. I raised my middle finger. He shrugged and smiled, knowing he was getting a reaction. Were it me, I'd be packing up my wife's things and trying to establish my territory. But if your situation turns out like one of my fellow officers, your wife is going to just move right back in. I'd at least get some of my personal stuff secured. Change the combination on the safe if you have one. Grab up important paperwork. Just no driving around tonight. I've been thinking about that, I admitted. I just didn't want to take the risk of getting angry and starting to smash things up or maybe burning the place down. I fantasized about that part. The house is paid for, and I don't think it's a crime if I don't file for insurance. Gary shook his head. Getting drunk and staying in a hotel is certainly cheaper than letting your anger get ahead of common sense and lashing out. You probably wouldn't be arrested for arson, but your wife could still sue you for destroying her stuff. Even if she doesn't file charges for vandalism, she owns half of everything. Not worth the risk. He paused for a moment. Even finding my girlfriend cheating on me wasn't reason for me to kick her out. Not according to the law. She was living there already, and it was considered her home. She got to stay. I asked him how he handled it. Oh, she got to stay in the apartment, Gary said. But that didn't mean I had to stay with her. So I moved all my stuff out, and I mean all my stuff. The furniture was mine, so when I finished, all that was left were her clothes in the closet and what was in the dresser, neatly folded on the floor. Her toiletries were still in the bathroom, and her computer, books, and other things were left on the floor. I left the food in the fridge because she bought some of it, but not a cup, dish, or pot to eat it from. My buddies helped, so they were all witnesses to nothing being destroyed or messed up in any way. I had to laugh. It was that or cry when I thought about how that part of my life was over. My marriage was finished. I was simply not going to let Donna treat me that way. When Gary once again suggested I call my daughter, I agreed. First, I had him drive me to a legal substances store to buy a toothbrush, then to a hotel. I stipulated it not be the Marriott. Once I checked in, I called my daughter. Gary called one of his fellow officers to pick him up, and after we exchanged phone numbers, he left. "Daddy, why are you in a hotel?" My daughter June asked immediately. "Did something happen between you and Mom?" I told her I would prefer to talk to her in person if she was available. "Hell yeah, I'm available," she replied. "I went out to dinner with my friends, but I'm always available for you. They'll be there as soon as I can." After I hung up, I realized I'd forgotten to tell her not to call her mother before we talked, but then decided I didn't care if she did. "What's going on?" June asked as soon as I opened the door to my hotel room. She frowned at my half-drunk state. "You being drunk means Mom did something. I'm guessing whatever she did was both stupid and hurtful." "She isn't stupid enough to try to kick you out," June added. "You'd have dug your heels in. She left you, didn't she?" "She is off with Aunt Doris," I replied. June asked how I gathered that, and I told her I had driven by the house but didn't stop. "Aunt Doris' car is in the driveway, but over to one side, in front of your part of the garage. I couldn't tell if Mom's car was there," June said. "Oh, did they go off together to party or worse?" June asked the last part, stepping close to see my reaction. I nodded. "Damn," she exclaimed, then grabbed me in a hug and squeezed me as she cried. "I'm so sorry, Daddy." I couldn't hold it back and began to sob. Despite my anger and the hurt of my wife leaving me, I knew my little girl was on my side. I loved her, but I can't put up with this. 24 years down the drain, I lamented. "Not down the drain. Just a new beginning, Daddy." "You have me," June proclaimed as we hugged. I was happy she didn't immediately protest and say I needed to forgive. Finally, I had to ask, "Did you know any of this? Any advanced warning?" She shook her head, then hesitated before continuing. "Well, I suspected something was up. She and Aunt Doris have been spending a lot of time together. Surely you noticed that," June offered. I agreed. She even stayed over at her sister's house overnight on occasion. The light bulb came on. "Well, Doris has been doing a lot of partying," June continued. "And by that, I mean going out to bars, dancing, and whatnot. She didn't say it outright, but I'm sure she's been seeing other people. She'd mention some guy and comment on his looks, like saying he was cute, that kind of thing. Mom said she sort of wished she could do that, but then she'd quickly add something like, 'But I'm married,' and at times she complained that you could make more money. All you had to do was go ask for a raise." June blushed. "I don't like to say it this way, but Mom said several times, if your dad would grow a spine, he could go demand to be paid what he's worth. He can't even stand up to his own brother, for Christ's sake." I shrugged and said, "We had enough money to live well if Donna would not waste it." "Oh, I know," June said. "I've watched her waste money, especially after you wouldn't let me. You gave me an allowance the whole time I was in school. I mean, even after paying all my bills, you told me to consider that my pay for being a student and getting good grades. I had to live within that amount or do without. I think you deliberately limited how much I got, so I had to learn to budget," June said, breaking off as she looked in the minibar. "I can't drink that straight. I need to mix it. Do you want to pay the high cost of this minibar, or should I walk down and use the soda machine down the hall? I need a drink while you tell me what happened." The thought made me laugh. Even now, she was looking for the economical way. She was my daughter. for one thing. This is not cheap stuff, I replied. It's high-quality single-barrel whiskey. It cost me over $50 a bottle. But save the walk. Well, spend the money. Half of it is coming out of your mother's share anyway, when we settle our property. That statement set June back. So this is not just an argument about money? She asked. I told her it was much more and laid it all out. I gave her a detailed account of my time from when I came home to her showing up, including what I observed her mother and aunt do in the lobby of the Marriott. A cop sat with you in your car and then drove you here? She asked, impressed. I nodded. Yeah, a nice guy. Smart. He'll be successful at whatever he does. He gave me some advice, like not going home and letting anger take over, or throwing everything out in front of the neighbors to see. Although, I'm not about to hide any of this from anybody. She made her decision, and I made mine. As far as I'm concerned, I'll let everyone know what happened. She might even like the advertisement. She's making her own choices now. Maybe she thinks she can trade up, like she said. Or maybe she's trying to push an agenda to get me to accept her new direction. She has to know she can't keep living like this. June listened intently. You sat and thought all this out while sitting in your car? She asked, slightly amused. I'm not as stupid as everyone thinks, I said. I can think through a situation. Your mom didn't just suddenly decide to act out. She and your aunt have been planning this. This has been building for some time. June nodded as she listened, but then her expression changed. What bothered me earlier was how much she might have told you. And if you were on board with it, I continued. June stared at me, her mouth open, and then it turned to a glare, softened by tears. You can't believe I would be part of any plan to hurt you, Daddy? I shook my head. I knew for sure that June had no idea what her mother was up to. I just had so many thoughts as I sat there drinking, thinking about how this all came about, what really happened, and who knew about it. Well, I can tell you this, June declared. She might be my mother, but that's not going to stop me from telling her how wrong she is. She asked me what I planned to do next. In the short term, I told her about Gary's advice regarding how he handled his situation with his girlfriend. He's not an expert, but I have to give him credit. He handled it directly and decisively, but kept his cool. I hope I can do the same, but I'll tell you this, there's no way back. I'm just not wired to forgive this. This wasn't a one-time mistake that can be fixed with counseling. This was a deliberate decision to hurt me, to rub my face in it. Your mom might try to tell me it was just a mistake, or that she was just trying to get my attention. Well, she messed up. June nodded and said, You were always tough on me. Not that I couldn't get a lot of things out of you, but I could tell when I pushed the line. Your lower lip would quiver when you got mad, and you'd pull your shoulders back when your decision was final. I knew then it was over. I guess this is not the time to discuss you helping me convince Uncle Bob to give me a job at East Sink, June asked with a grin. I knew she'd been applying around and had a few offers, but all of them were out of state. Now I gotta stay close to home to support you. I laughed but felt immensely better about things. I wanted her to be her own person and do what was best for her, so I never pushed her to work for Bob and me. Of course, I'd love to have her come to work for the family business, but now is not the time for that big conversation. We'll work that out, honey, was all I said. June and I sat and talked for a few hours. She was too tipsy to drive after a few drinks, so we went down to the lobby for a complimentary toothbrush. She slept in the other queen-sized bed. I heard her get up a couple of times to go to the bathroom. I woke to the sound of the shower running. June emerged fully dressed, her hair damp. I've got to go home to change clothes, then I'm going to the house. You take a shower, check out, and meet me there. We need to get started on handling things, she ordered. No breakfast first, boss? I asked. She grinned at my sarcasm and sternly told me to get up, shower, and get home to change as well, then we could talk about breakfast. I really didn't want to go home by myself. I figured I might just change my mind and dump some of Donna's things into the front yard as a public statement and let her move it back on her own. I took my time, and 2 hours later, I drove up to my house to find June's car parked in the driveway. A pickup truck ID never seen before sat in the street. I walked inside to find June drinking coffee with Gary, the officer from the night before. You told me how Gary, Officer Jensen, was helpful. So I copied his phone number down and gave him a call this morning, June explained. This won't get you into trouble? I asked the young man. He shrugged and told me he was off duty and this was his day off. He was pretty sure his captain would be on board, and if not, he was thinking about a career change anyway. I want to change clothes. Gary, can I get that car blocking my access to my garage towed away? I asked. He grinned and told me, it's your house. So I called a towing company and had the car removed. The person who left it blocking my garage would have to pay for the tow and a $40 a day impound fee when it was claimed. June had called a local storage firm that offered inside, climate-controlled storage to reserve a place. It wasn't long before most of my clothing and all the personal possessions I didn't want to risk were safely locked away. I even took a bundle of bedding, towels, and the guest room bed and dresser, along with my recliner and the big screen television. I took the everyday dishes but left Donna her good china. I made a point to clean out the liquor cabinet. It was petty, but I wasn't going to leave any of it. We still have time to spare, Daddy. You need to authorize a few things I did for you, like moving half your money. I used my savings account. You can do all that online, you know, she said. I also called your investment broker this morning to tell him you were in the process of a messy divorce and asked if you needed to go in person or if he could lock up your account. He said it happened all the time, and he could do that. Locking it up is easy, but to unlock it, it takes both you and Mom together, or a court order. Is that okay? I nodded. She grinned. Good, because that's what I did. I also canceled your credit cards. I reported them stolen, but I paid off the balance first from your bank account before I did. All your details were on your desk. I know you know better than to leave your book of PINs and passwords lying around, June said. I asked what I was going to do for money. Well, I left enough money for you to make an ATM withdrawal for cash, about $400. Plus, remember the credit card you gave me for emergencies while I was in school? You can use it. You and I are on that account. Damn, you were on top of things. Do you have it in for your mother? Gary asked. I thought the man was going to burn to a crisp with the look June shot him. No, my mom screwed my dad over so she could go do whatever. If the situation were reversed and my dad had been the one to make that mistake, I'd have done the same sort of things to help my mom. I'm just trying to be fair. I'm going to prevent her from taking advantage of him when she thinks about it. I have no doubt Mom will try to pull cash out. I know my aunt. She'll be egging Mom on. Once they realize Dad isn't going to give in to them, they'll act out. Before we left the house, my phone rang. It was Donna. Why the hell is my credit card not working? She demanded. They said it was reported stolen. You're upset because I found a real man, and your little ego can't handle it. I'm standing in front of an ATM, and I'll be getting as much money as I can before the bank closes. You're not going to stop me from having a good time this weekend. I knew she could only get about $2,000. The rest June had transferred. She'd have enough money to get by for a few weeks if she didn't waste it all partying. I was willing to bet she'd be the one paying for everyone's good time. You made your decision, Donna. I made mine, I said quietly. I am separating our lives every way I can until I talk to a lawyer Monday morning. We are finished. I hung up before she could reply. June and Gary had heard the conversation. I'm hungry. Let's go get something to eat, June said. I knew I couldn't find an apartment and didn't want to stay in a hotel for the rest of the weekend. I called my brother and asked if he could put me up. What the hell did you do? Bob asked. I told him, nothing at all. Don't tell me Donna went all crazy and kicked you out for no reason. I told him it was worse than that. Well, the guest room is made up. Bring your butt over here, unless you need me to come get you. By the way, I hope you grabbed all the bottles of that single-barrel whiskey. Don't leave any around for Donna to pour out. I told him every bottle was secured or accounted for. I'd already processed one through my liver and kidneys. Well, don't waste any more of it before you get here. I want you sober enough to explain what happened before you get too far gone. I told him I was taking June out to eat and would be over in a few hours. June was grinning as she looked at Gary, who looked dumbfounded. Oh, my uncle and dad break each other's balls all the time, she said. I'm a big girl, Daddy. I use worse. Anyway, Gary, Uncle Bob, and Daddy have each other's backs. Their banter means nothing. You can tell it's serious when the banter ends. I'll bet their next conversation is straight up. After we ate, They followed me to my brother's house and then went on their way. My brother and I had a series of long talks for most of the rest of the weekend. His wife, Evelyn, listened to a few at the beginning and muttered a few comments like, conceited, self-serving, which, before leaving us alone. I wondered when I'd hear from Donna next. She had not called me when she checked her bank balance. About 5 o'clock on Sunday, my phone rang. "Hello, Donna," I said in as level of a voice as I could muster. "What the hell have you done?" She almost yelled. "Where the hell is Doris' car? I thought you were just mad and canceled the credit cards to stop me from having a good time." "You mean that piece of crap car blocking my garage?" I asked. "I had it towed. I'm not sure how late they stay open on a Sunday, but their business card is on the kitchen table. You'll have to pay the towing and the impound fee to get it back, though. I hope you saved enough of your party money for that," I said. Donna gritted her teeth, and I could hear Doris yelling in the background, calling me all sorts of names. "I told you we'd talk when I got home, and I'd tell you how things are going to be. You're going to pay for your little temper tantrum. You know it will be our money that gets the car back, not hers. First of all, your comment about my little male ego just cost you," I said, seething. "Secondly, I have no interest in hearing you dictate how things are going to be. You made it clear you were leaving, and you found someone else. As far as I'm concerned, he can have you. Did you seriously think I'd stick around to listen to you tell me how things were going to go? If you look around, I've cleared out a lot of my personal stuff from the house. I told you yesterday I was separating my life from yours. I'm just going to take my little bruised ego and leave you to it. So, if you have something productive to offer, say it. Otherwise, hang up." I heard her mutter, "This is not how it was supposed to go." In the background, I could hear Doris say, "Tell him to back off. He'll come crawling back before long." I hung up. Surprisingly, I wasn't upset. I felt cold inside, totally detached. I realized I might mourn the death of my marriage later, but right now, I didn't really care. However, I certainly wanted to get some payback. I halfway expected her to call me back to curse at me after she looked around the house, but I didn't hear another word from Donna or Doris until late the next day. I'd taken the day off to talk to our corporate attorney, who quickly directed me to a divorce lawyer. I received the usual, unpleasant news about what happens in a divorce. I'd lose half of everything. Fortunately, my trust protected my business interests. Donna made about the same income as I did, so alimony wasn't going to be an issue. We had little in personal investments, only about $20,000, since we mostly spent our extra income sending June to school and helping Doris out of her financial messes. Our main asset was our house, which I'd be happy to sell or let Donna buy me out, though I knew she couldn't afford to do that without a large loan. We had no dependent children, and Doris didn't count as a dependent. I made plans to have Donna served the following afternoon. I honestly thought I wouldn't hear a peep out of Donna until after she was served, and then it would be a lot of vindictive screaming. At around 4 in the afternoon, she called. "I'd like to talk," she offered quietly. "So talk," I told her. "Not now. I'm still at work," she replied. "Can you come home, and we can talk in private?" "Nope," I answered succinctly. "You can close your office door and talk now, or call me back after you leave. But as far as my driving all the way to the house for 2 minutes or less of discussion, it's not worth the effort." "What do you mean 2 minutes? Is that all our marriage is worth to you?" she asked, perplexed and starting to get angry. "No, it's worth far more than that," I answered. "The time for a serious discussion was really before you made the decisions you did. I told you yesterday I was separating from you. I've already started clearing out my personal things. I'm leaving you to it, and I'll take my little bruised ego with me. If you have something productive to offer, say it. Otherwise, hang up." I heard her take a deep breath, but I cut her off. "But I'm still willing to talk. I'd like to hear what you have to say. But I know your sister is going to show up and start running her mouth, and I will walk out the door. Or if she gets in my way and tries to block my car, that will result in one of 2 things. Either I have her car towed again, or I break her window to release the emergency brake so I can push it out of the way. Either option will get me arrested. So if you want to have a conversation, make sure she doesn't show up and I don't hear anything I'm not interested in. Otherwise, I'll walk away." "No, It's not worth the cost of gasoline or my time to drive home. Same thing goes for a restaurant or some public place. Call me back when you're in a position to talk. I hung up. It didn't take long, only about 15 minutes, before she called me back. I had been watching my phone since we had it linked by a tracking app, so I knew she was still in her office. I wondered if she'd been thinking about her approach or consulting with her sister. I didn't care one way or the other. "Hello," I answered. "I can talk now," she announced. "Okay. A few ground rules," I said, grinning at the surprise in her voice. "First, I don't want you to waste my time with explanations about how this guy you're with is so much more exciting than I am. That will just piss me off. He might have a better body, but I don't really care. You never complained before, nor did you suggest anything different. We used to experiment with various things, so don't tell me he's better in bed or he's somehow more adventurous. And don't tell me he paid you compliments about how beautiful you are. That's what guys do when they want something." I heard a gasp on the other end, likely a sign that she was realizing where this was going. "I also don't want you to tell me this was just intim, and that it's me you really love. We've used toys together, and I know you use them in private. Of course, I was never jealous of them, so don't think for a second that this guy is somehow no more than a substitute. I know what you've been up to. There was a person involved this time," I said, noticing a shift in her demeanor. I suspected I was dismantling every one of her justifications before she could even present them. "And I certainly don't want to hear you threaten me that if I don't fall in line with your new life, your new companion will take care of you in a way that you think you deserve. That was Doris' idea when you left, right? If your new guy was so well off, why did you need to use your credit cards the other morning or withdraw money from an ATM?" I could almost hear her cringe, realizing I knew too much. "How did you know he drives a Corvette?" she asked, her voice trailing off. I interrupted, and last but certainly not least, don't try to tell me this was your first and only time stepping outside our marriage. The way he greeted both you and your sister told me he knew both of you well. This wasn't your first time with him. I don't care if this was your second or 100th time, but it's clear you've been involved with him before." She gasped. "I'm sure you didn't hire a private investigator," she said, almost defensively. "You had no clue until Friday evening. We were so careful." I wanted to laugh at her naivete but didn't. She'd completely forgotten about the car situation and how I didn't want it getting back to him. Not yet. "So, hearing all those rules of what I didn't want to hear, what do you have to say?" She started crying, and I let her, sipping my beer. Yes, I was coldly sitting there drinking a beer while my marriage was falling apart. "We've been together for 24 years, Donna said, her voice breaking. "Isn't that worth saving?" I tried very hard not to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh, not at all. It was one of disbelief. "Apparently, you didn't think it was worth saving when you started cheating." Another gasp. I interrupted her. "Tell me, did this guy know you were married?" I asked. She whimpered. "I think so. Well, I'm pretty sure. Yes, he had to, from the things he said. He gave me advice." "What kind of advice?" I asked. "He told me if you got upset, I should tell you how much a divorce would cost you. He said you'd lose half of everything you own, and you'd even have to pay me alimony," Donna said. "So, this guy was playing the power card?" I asked, trying to piece everything together. "Yeah," she replied. "He told me no man would want to be seen as weak, and that I should be in charge if I played my cards right. Doris told me the same thing. She believes him. She said some of the other women she knows got their husbands to fall in line. They might have shaky marriages, but no divorce because it would cost too much. So he knew we were married and didn't care. You knew we were married too, and from the sound of it, you don't care either." I was silent for a moment, trying to process everything she had said. "Now, I'm going to ask you one more question. After that, you decide if you really have anything to add. What do you think we're going to accomplish right now, talking?" She started crying again. "I want us to stay together, to stay married. You can't just get over your fragile ego, can you?" Without saying another word, I hung up. I mentally kicked myself for reacting so quickly. There was one more thing I wanted to know. Did this guy target me specifically? Did he know who I was, or was I just another easy mark? I walked into Bob's office the next day, just after lunch. "Yes, Mr. Jacobs, You wanted to see me? He asked casually. He seemed surprised to see me sitting to one side, but he didn't react much. He probably knew who I was, but hadn't connected me to the person his colleague had been involved with over the weekend. Bob's assistant, Fontano, was one of our liaisons. He'd been with the company for about a year, serving as a sort of public relations official. His job was to manage our image with the press and smooth over any client issues. I thought it was a waste of money, Bob agreed, since our company's track record largely spoke for itself. Tell me you were out of the office Friday, Bob said. What did you do, and how did you spend the weekend? Trey looked a little confused. I spent Friday with a man from Global Medical, Larry Atwell. He came over from New Orleans, and we coordinated our activities on our publicity. The rest of the weekend, I was in the company of a couple of ladies, Trey stammered. Can I ask why you're asking? Yeah, I heard you were at the Marriott, where you entertained them. I assume Atwell was still with you. I hope it wasn't on the company dime, and that these women weren't prostitutes, Bob stated. No, sir. We did meet up with the women for a good time, but it was Friday evening after our meeting. Those women were not paid, Trey responded. Bob asked, what kind of good time? Well, sir, it's not really any of your business since it doesn't concern the company. But I'll tell you, it's a little hobby of mine to seduce willing women and have intim. I take them out, wine and dine them, and then entice them into my bed for a bit of fun. These were 2 women I knew. It's all totally consensual. How did this come to your attention? Bob shook his head. Suffice it to say, it has. I want to hear the story. Sit down. Trey began to grin as he relaxed. He apparently thought he wasn't in trouble and was actually a little proud of his conquests. Well, I'm single now. I got divorced 2 years ago because I like to play the field. I enjoy seducing women. I meet them, buy them a few drinks, dance a bit, and if I can get them to join me, I'm pretty good at it. And it's fun. Nobody gets hurt. The scumsucker was 32 and good-looking. Bob always thought he was a smarmy scumsucker, as he seemed to carry a permanent smirk on his face. How many of the ladies you meet are married? Don't they care about their marriages? Bob asked. Trey's grin broadened. Oh, you have that backwards. Most of the women I go after are married. They make the best targets. It reduces the risk of permanent involvement. We just provide a little entertainment for each other. They fall into 2 types. One type wants a little spice on the side, a dirty little secret, a bit of fun they can hide from their husbands. It makes them feel alive, sexy, and maybe a little naughty. Some of them are real wild ones and want to let their hair down. They'll do things for me they say they never would do for their husbands, or haven't since they were dating. I'll screw them, and Minnie will record that on her phone to show me later, just for the extra kick. We both get off on it. Well, the hubby doesn't know, of course. He just thinks he's getting to screw his wife, who came home from partying all hot and bothered. The second type is a little more involved, but super fun to work with. These are the wives looking to upgrade. Hubby can't get them off, so they need a better lover. What did you do, and how did you spend the weekend? Bob asked, looking at Trey. Trey seemed a little confused and replied, I spent Friday with a man from Global Medical, Larry Atwell. He came over from New Orleans, and we coordinated our activities on our publicity. The rest of the weekend, I was in the company of a couple of ladies. Can I ask why you're asking? Trey said, Yeah, I heard you were at the Marriott, where you entertained them. I assume Atwell was still with you. I hope it wasn't on the company dime, and that these women weren't prostitutes, Bob stated. No, sir. We did meet up with the women, but it was Friday evening after our meeting. They weren't paid, Trey responded. What kind of good time? Bob asked. Well, it's more of a personal hobby of mine, and I don't think it concerns the company, but I'll tell you. I enjoy spending time with women, and I have my ways of making those experiences enjoyable for both sides. It's all based on mutual consent, Trey explained. Bob nodded but pressed on. How often do you meet women who are married? Don't they care about their marriages? Actually, most of the women I meet are married. It reduces the chances of long-term involvement, and we just provide each other with some entertainment. Women tend to fall into 2 categories. Some are looking for a little excitement on the side, something they can keep a secret, while others are simply looking for something new, Trey said. How do you meet these women? Bob asked. I go to a couple of clubs where women are looking for a good time. I'm known as a friendly guy who can afford to take women to a nice hotel, like the Marriott. I try to be respectful and make sure they know what to expect. Some of them even introduce me to their friends, Trey replied. Bob asked, do you have any special tricks to save money, like with hotel rooms? Trey smiled. Yeah, my cousin works as a night manager at the Marriott. He helps me with the room booking. After midnight, he updates the system to say the room was unoccupied, so I don't have to pay for it. The cleaning staff just sees that it needs to be cleaned, and nobody notices. This weekend, I had a suite, all for free. It makes things a little easier. Bob raised an eyebrow. You really don't pay for any of this? No illegal substances or anything? Trey shook his head. No illegal substances at all. Well, I mean, no illegal substances. Both Larry and I use some over-the-counter products to maintain our energy, but that's about it. These women were very open-minded, but I never had to push any boundaries too far. Bob continued asking questions. Have you ever been interested in any women at work? No, I've always kept things professional, Trey responded. My dad taught me early on that you shouldn't mix business with personal relationships. Trey said, my daddy taught me early in life never to mix business with personal matters. I know we have strict non-fraternization rules. Okay, so you meet women here in town. Do you do anything like that when you travel? Bob asked. I mean, you entertained Larry Atwell here. Does he do the same when you visit him? And do any of the other company reps we do business with behave the same way? I don't want this to blow back on us. Only Larry, Trey replied. Global has a condo for visiting dignitaries, so we meet women over there and use that place. Got it, Bob said. So, you do this both here and there. One other concern is, will your expense account pass muster if we look closely? Suddenly, Trey became very nervous. Bob smiled, subtly pressing a button on his desk. Now, we're going to take a very hard look at your expense account records. If we find you've abused the system, we'll do one of two things. Prosecute you for theft or embezzlement, or whatever the legal term is, but in any event, we'll take back the money from your final paycheck. Trey stammered, You're firing me? Why? For taking women to a hotel? Yes, I said from across the room. One of those women you met this weekend, Donna, is my soon-to-be ex-wife. The other is my sister-in-law. Trey stared at me for a moment, then muttered, Oh, hell. Two security guards walked into the room as Trey glared at Bob and me. You can't fire me for being with your wife, he declared, trying to recover his composure. It was consensual. It's not my fault she made those decisions. I'll sue you both for wrongful termination. You should learn the law. Louisiana is an at-will state. You can fire me for any reason unless it's something protected by law, like discrimination. And cheating on your wife doesn't fall into that category. Actually, Bob said calmly, these gentlemen will escort you to your office to pack up your personal effects. I suggest you leave before some of the employees find out what kind of person you are. Trey switched tactics. Fire me, and I'll tell everyone about your wife. I'll tell them what happened. He sneered. Everyone will know what kind of people you are. Bob didn't react, but I replied, Please, go ahead. It will save me the trouble. I don't want anyone thinking I treated my wife unfairly when I divorce her. As Trey was escorted out, he began yelling loudly, I'm being fired for being with Jacob's wife. Bob turned to me, grinning. How about we knock off a little early, little brother? I could really go for a beer or three. We've got another meeting in a couple of hours to get ready for. I agreed, still shaking from the adrenaline, but I let Bob guide me out the door. I knew his secretary and the security guys had probably been listening to the whole conversation. By the end of the day, everyone in the company would know what had happened, and I didn't care one bit. You know, I said, laughing, Trey was yelling that he was with Jacob's wife, but he didn't say which Jacob. Bob groaned. Evelyn's not going to be happy if people think it's her, he said. Now I really need that beer. We laughed as we left, knowing that Trey better leave town before things got more complicated for him. Later, Bob and I were sitting in his living room, sipping our beers. It was 5 o'clock, and my phone rang. Showtime, I said as I picked up. Sitting with us were my daughter June and the young cop Gary. They seemed to be enjoying each other's company and sat side by side on the sofa. I realized they were spending a fair amount of time together when Bob's wife, Evelyn, invited June to Sunday dinner, and she refused, saying she had plans with someone she had just met. She had been too busy to meet with me the evening before as well. I wasn't at all surprised when he accompanied her this afternoon, and to be honest, I fully approved. "You're a sorry piece of work," Donna's voice boomed over the speaker on my phone. "Do you have any idea how humiliated I was? Do you realize that you might have cost me my promotion and maybe even my job? How could you do this after all our years together?" "Well, I hope you don't lose your job," I answered, trying to keep a straight face. "I'd hate to have to pay support to my unemployed ex-wife. But I really don't care if your promotion is dead in the water. You might deserve it. To be honest, I timed your being served to coincide with the school board meeting being let out, and I could tell you were deeply humiliated. But as to why I would do it after our years together, remember when you scoffed at me about how you were treating me and how my ego was bruised the other day? You even repeated that line when we talked yesterday. Well, I hope your ego took a hit as well. It certainly appeared so." "Video?" she screeched. "What video?" "Of course, my lawyer advised me not to be present, so I sent someone to record it," I said. "Speaking of video, I'm going to send you a video of Orville Wendell Fontano III, or should I say Lance, as he prefers to be known, giving details about you and Doris spending the weekend with him. He told Bob and me how he spent time with both you and Doris, and even invited his cousin to join them in the room. I'd suggest you get an attorney quickly so you can sign and return the divorce papers. I wouldn't want to send copies of these videos to everyone. I like your parents. They're getting up there in age, but I doubt they'd want to hear about everything. I like them, but there are limits to how much I will spare them. I refuse to let them think of me as the bad guy in our divorce. You and Doris need to make sure of that." "Yeah, it's part of my fragile male ego," I continued, "but I won't be the villain here. I've been fair in the terms I offered, and I'm even splitting without alimony. Once you sell the house, you can keep helping your sister out financially, well, for a while, at least, until you run out of money. I'd advise you to move in together and control the finances. I know she gave you bad advice and introduced you to Lance, but you two might still work things out if you don't let your egos get in the way." I could hear her crying as we disconnected. I looked around the room, shrugging. The video of her being served had taken a while to stop her from crying after it happened, but I wondered how long it would take her now. I would never know. I had already seen the video of her being served before she called. She had just left a meeting with the school board, where they were discussing her promotion within the school administration. In the video, she walked out all smiles, followed by several board members. I suspected the meeting had gone well for her. But that smile turned to a look of consternation when a young process server stepped up and asked if she was Donna J. When she confirmed that she was Donna Jacobs, the process server handed her the envelope and announced loudly that she had been served. Because of the things she had said to me earlier, I couldn't get over the fact that she had been unfaithful and sought attention from other men. In my frustration, I went one step further. A man dressed as an old-time town crier stepped into the foyer and loudly proclaimed, hear ye, Donna Jacobs, now known for her actions, has been served." 2 women standing nearby began to blow into their instruments. I thought they were just going to announce the message, but instead, they played a tune that resembled Here Comes the Bride, before singing, Here Comes the Bride, all dressed to start anew. Her marriage is over. She's on her way through. They turned and walked out, continuing the tune as they left the hall. The video ended with Donna collapsing to her knees, crying. Nobody noticed the young police officer standing to the side, recording the entire event on his cell phone. "Daddy, Gary recorded that as a favor for you. But please don't send it out," my daughter June implored. I begged him not to record it, but he said he had promised and his word was his bond. I told June the only person who might see that video from now on was her mother, unless Donna contested the divorce. Donna would certainly get a copy of Fontano's exit interview video. Epilogue: Donna did not contest the divorce. Her lawyer told her my terms were reasonable and in line with current divorce laws. As expected, she begged to go to counseling to save our marriage. I could tell by the anger in her eyes and by how she opened her mouth that she was about to mention my fragile male ego again. Say it. Say fragile male ego once, I said. If I ever hear you or your sister utter that phrase again, I will send all videos out, especially to your parents. She fell silent, staring at me as she cried. She hated having to sell the house we once owned. It wasn't good enough for her until she was forced to sell. Then it became something she felt she had lost. I hoped she didn't give too much of her share of the proceeds to pay off her sister's bills. June said she would try to prevent that, but I didn't care. Orville, aka Trey, aka Lance, found it difficult to find another job similar to the one he had with us. Perhaps his legal issues, especially the theft charges for abusing his expense account, hurt his future prospects. Maybe it was the laughter HR reps at prospective companies heard when they checked his employment history. A few companies asked for an explanation, but not many. Trey's legal troubles were compounded when Marriott Hotel Corporation filed charges against him and his cousin for theft of services. I hadn't even known that could happen, but a night manager isn't authorized to comp rooms, especially for personal gain. Marriott made the situation public to set an example for their employees nationwide. I heard the charges were eventually dropped, but only after Orville and his cousin went bankrupt paying their $300 an hour attorney fees for their defense. Global Medical quickly fired and replaced Larry Atwell, Trey's friend. He joined Trey in the ranks of the unemployed. I'm guessing someone was looking out for his future, like someone at home was keeping an eye on Trey's activities. As for me, I lost out as well. My 24-year marriage was over. It would take me a while to regain trust in women, but I met several who assured me I could get back on track without much effort. They were there to convince me that not all women should be judged by the actions of a few in my family. On the bright side, I no longer had to contend with a deceitful wife and a parasitic sister-in-law. The only two who came out ahead in this whole situation were my daughter June and her future fiancé, Gary, a former cop, and my present protege. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.